Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Harcka Heavy Cruiser. Now I should also just say, there was a patch note today that dropped, which I thought was very interesting, this big Fire and Faith one. That's the blog for it and the update for it that was released, but it's the patch that was dropped in like May is what it's referring to. So I don't know why the announcement came that much after the patch. But yeah, as far as I can tell, nothing changed, so I don't have to redo all my videos. In any event, today we're talking about the Harcka Heavy Cruiser. So let's look at the stats here. We're looking at durability of 400. We're looking at 1,265 armor points, 1,050 hull points, and then it's got 5 heavy autocannons at 4 damage per second each with 300 pierce. Its hidden statistics are 75 armor strength and a maximum speed of 725. So this is your sort of like baseline heavy cruiser that's meant for like brawling with enemy ships there. And yeah, it's pretty much exactly what you would expect out of it. Very rugged, very durable, quite capable of taking a lot of shots. And dishing out damage is something it's pretty okay at, but not really that specialized in. So let's run through its cost here and then go through its upgrades, and I'll talk a little bit about the unit after that. So this unit is pretty cheap, except for its supply cost. Its supply cost is very heavy at 15, but 550 credits, 250 metal cost, and then 25 crystal. So pretty easy to mass a bunch of these, max out your supply, and then transition to other units as they get destroyed. In particular, you're probably going to want to replace these guys with capital ships as soon as you're capable of doing that. Still though, let's take a look at the upgrade paths. So no unique upgrade for the Harcka Heavy Cruiser here. Further down, we've got the autocannon as the weapon for this thing. So this is the one where refined propellants is going to actually matter, because you are probably still going to be using the Harcka Heavy Cruiser at this point in the game. If you are playing as Tech Primacy, then the additional 10% also applies to the ship a little bit more than the other ones. Still though, you're probably going to be using advanced ballistics with the Harckas for the earlier portions where you're going to be using these guys, but they're probably more leaning into the refined propellants upgrade. For the other ones, you're looking at the advanced metallurgy, the titanoferric plating, and the repellent premium armor. The titanoferric plating is very, very nice for these guys, putting them up at 100, which means that they take half damage on their armor from all sources, even if those things are capable of going through durability like a hot knife through butter. The repellent premium armor, obviously a little bit nicer, but that is very expensive and very late game. By the time you're getting repellent premium armor, there's a decent chance that you don't even want to keep building any sort of heavy cruisers there. Hull reinforcement, the fortified superstructure, expert damage control. The hull regeneration actually matters a little bit more in this instance than it does for most of your ships. The reason is that since these things tend to survive combat a little bit better, then the hull regeneration matters a bit more, but you're still mostly doing this for the max hull points. By the time you get to expert damage control, of course, like 5% extra max hull points doesn't really matter that much, but the hull regeneration at that point, absolutely very, very good. If you're getting hit by a bunch of AoEs that aren't capable of killing the Harcka, there's a decent chance that the expert damage control is going to kick in and be kind of useful there, sort of. For the other upgrades, the cruiser shield refit, an extra 750 shield points. That's actually a pretty okay amount for these guys. It makes sense that they don't have 1,000, but you know, 750 is pretty good regardless for these guys. The percent bonuses are, of course, not as good for these guys, considering where you're getting them, but it's still something that does matter for them, and it does help out a little bit there. 750 extra hit points for these guys also matters a little bit more than a lot of your other ships, just because if you're getting shot by things with less than 400 pierce, you're obviously getting a lot more value out of that than the 750 sort of demonstrates. So very, very nice bonus for these guys. It gives them the ability to keep in a fight a little bit longer there. For other upgrades, I do think this is a unit that you want to mass. So you're looking at counter deployment, you're looking at labor negotiations, industrial complex, and industrial juggernaut. They're not that expensive. They're very supply intensive. So you're probably going to want to like pump a bunch of these guys out there, have them go out and fight, probably get destroyed, and then just replace them, or try to replace them with something a little bit better if you can, because generally speaking, if you supply cap yourself, like you can just throw out a whole bunch of attack waves of like your crappier ships and then just replace them with your capitals as you destroy them. I think that the ability to have a large number of these, though, they become quite dangerous when there's a large number of them. For other bonuses, the culture bonus for extra speed, it doesn't help them too much because their base speed is so low that they're not moving fast enough for it to really matter. But it does make a bit of a difference there. So let's talk a little bit about the Harcka Heavy Cruiser and where I think they're sitting in terms of the meta. So this is one of those units that the patch that happened quite a while ago, the major update one that came with the DLC, kind of actually really gutted the Harcka in an indirect way. So the reason that I think that the Harcka is way the reason I think the Harcka is way worse off than it used to be is because all of the frigates, the Cobalt Light Frigate, the Skirmisher, the Disciple, these all got 200 Pierce. And most of the targets in this game have either 200 or less Pierce, or they have 400 or higher. There's only a very small number of ships in the game that have armor values or durability values between 200 and 300, which is what the Harcka is designed to kill. Now, before the frigates got their upgrade, they were also capable of out-damaging or doing good damage against the targets with 200 durability. But now, if you see a target with 200 durability, you're much more cost-efficient going for the Cobalt Light Frigate. You do almost 50% additional damage by going for Cobalts for the cost over the Harckas. And as a result of that, the Harcka is just way, way worse damage. They're slower, so they don't get to those targets as quickly. Things like the Cobalt Light Frigate are actually surprisingly durable for their cost, even compared to a Harcka. 3 of those guys compared to this guy has a very comparable amount of armor, hull points, and shield points. So you're not really getting a humongous amount of value by upgrading to the Harcka Heavy Cruiser. And the very few things that have got around 300 durability, a lot of those things are capable of actually doing humongous cost-efficient damage against the Harcka Heavy Cruiser itself. Things like the Exoria Illuminator is very good into the Harcka in terms of dealing damage against the Harcka. Things like the Javelus is very good against things like the Harcka. Things like the Penetrator are very good against the Harcka. And those are all the things that are sort of around that 300 durability mark. There are a few other things that the Harcka does very well against, like the Vigilus, but for the most part, there's not as many things anymore where you would go for the Harcka Heavy Cruiser to deal cost-effective damage against that target instead of going for the Cobalt Light Frigate. And then, of course, the Harckas suffer a lot of damage reduction, do very little damage against things like capital ships. So the 300 Pierce means that you drop down to about 6.5-ish damage per second against a capital. That's not really great. That's not very cost efficient compared to, say, the Javelus, which is doing 10, or even the Caleb, which is doing 7.7. And then the Caleb, of course, being much cheaper than the Harcka. So the way that this used to work was all those targets that were at that 200 range, because the Harcka was so much more durable against those targets in a lot of the situations, and had the same damage per second as the Cobalt, the Harcka was a pretty good lateral choice to the Cobalt, because you'd be doing about the same damage, and you'd be more survivable. And if you're up against a whole bunch of, say, frigates plus the thing you're targeting, the frigates wouldn't really deal any damage to the Harcka. Now, if I'm up against, say, a bunch of Percherons, and my opponent has decided to go for those Percherons and guarded them with a bunch of frigates, I could just still rush in with a bunch of frigates of my own, kill those carriers, and then turn on their Cobalts, and we'd have a 50-50 fight with the Cobalts. Whereas if I go for the Harcka Heavy Cruiser, I'm going to have a slightly harder time getting there because I'm slower. And the only thing that's really advantageous about the Harcka at this point in time is that I'm not taking the damage, but I'm going to be killing those Percherons way slower and way less efficiently with the Harckas. So it's kind of a trade-off. You're surviving a little bit better, but you're killing slower and you're getting to your target slower, and you may not even actually catch up to the Percherons in realistic scenarios there. So I think that the Harcka is still actually a pretty good ship. You can still definitely use it. But the situations where it's the sort of correct choice has really narrowed, where the targets that you're going after has really narrowed. Now, I will say that because the Cobalt is stronger, the Harcka is relatively stronger because of that. because if your opponent has gone for a whole bunch of like disciples or a whole bunch of skirmishers or a whole bunch of kobolds, the Harcka is a good counter against those units. The 300 Pierce is dramatic overkill, but you still have fairly good damage per second output against those sorts of targets, and you're capable of actually withstanding a lot of damage from those kinds of units, making it so that you're capable of out-damaging them in that sort of fight there. So in that sort of sense, the Harcka is still kind of good during that sort of earlier mid kind of game there. But during the very early game, I think that most targets you would want to be hitting them with the Cobalt Light Frigate instead. During the sort of mid game, a lot of the more dangerous units, it's more efficient to go for the Cobalt Light Frigate. And the only thing that you would really use to counter would be the Javelises, which you can still counter kind of okay with the the Cobalt Light Frigates, but you could also just counter those by getting your own Javelises. Same with the Exoria, you could counter the Exorias with your own Javelises. Same with the Volrat Penetrator. So the Harcka, I think, ends up in a really weird spot as a result of what it's good at. And then, of course, in the extreme late game, the Harcka Heavy Cruiser gets replaced by capital ships. The Harcka is much worse than a capital. If you could replace it with a coal, 3 Harckas versus a coal, I would go for the coal every time. The only exception is that it costs a lot more to get that capital ship. So when is the Harcka Heavy Cruiser going to be really important? That's when your opponent has enough AoE stuff that if you go for a bunch of frigates, they just explode instantly from the AoE bursts. So late game, when your Advent opponent has just gotten their Coronata out and is using Chastise or Chastic Burst or whatever, at that point in time, if you've got a whole bunch of frigates, they just immediately all explode. The Harcka Heavy Cruiser is going to still explode, but it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be able to dish out a lot more damage before it explodes. If you're up against a high level colony ship from the Visari, that's got a very scary AoE. That doesn't do very much damage against the Harcka. If you're up against the Advent Wrath and they've got the ability to use Fury, that doesn't do as much damage against the Harcka. So it's mostly in dealing with things that would wipe out a huge cluster of your Cobalts, because if you built 3 Cobalts instead of building a Harcka and you sort of multiply that by like 20, you still have like 20 Harcka Heavy Cruisers after all that, and you'd have no frigates. So that's where this thing becomes important, is once your opponent starts scaling into those very large amounts of good AoEs. But prior to that, you're ideally going to want to go with the Cobalt Light Frigate instead of this guy. And then later, after that, you're going to want to get capital ships instead of the Harcka Heavy Cruiser. But in any event, though, that is going to be our video for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.